Story 1. The small town of Buckner was known for its folklore, but the story of Shuck was one that sent shivers down everyone's spine. According to legend, Shuck was a demonic black dog that roamed the countryside at night, preying on unsuspecting victims. The locals had long since accepted the existence of Shuck, but it wasn't until a group of teenagers decided to test the myth that things took a turn for the worse. They were skeptical of the stories and wanted to prove that Shuck was nothing more than a figment of people's imagination. One dark and stormy night, they ventured into the woods armed with flashlights and a sense of bravado. As they walked deeper into the forest, they heard howls that sounded like they came from something much larger than a dog. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they stumbled upon a clearing with a strange circle of stones. In the center of the circle, they saw a large black dog, its eyes reflecting the light of their flashlights. It was Shuck. The group froze, unsure of what to do. That's when Shuck let out a deafening growl, and the teenagers took off running. They sprinted through the woods, branches and twigs tearing at their clothes and skin. They could hear the dog's heavy breathing and snarling right behind them. Suddenly, one of the teens tripped and fell. The others tried to help him up, but it was too late. Shuck had caught up to them, and the group was now face to face with the demonic beast. Shuck lunged at them, teeth bared and eyes glowing. The teens fought back with whatever they could find, but their efforts were futile. Shuck was too strong, too fast, too deadly. In the end, only one of the teens survived. He stumbled out of the woods, bloodied and bruised, and told the authorities what had happened. But they didn't believe him. They wrote him off as a traumatized victim of an animal attack, despite his insistence that Shuck was not just a dog, but a demon. To this day, people in Buckner still talk about Shuck. Some believe it's just a myth, while others are convinced that it's real. But one thing is certain. No one dares to venture into the woods at night anymore, not after what happened to those teenagers. Story 2. It was a typical summer day in the Midwest, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze. But as the day wore on, the weather took a turn for the worse. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind began to pick up. Samantha and her family were driving home from a family outing when the radio announced a tornado warning in the area. They had heard warnings before, but this one felt different. The sky had turned an eerie shade of green, and the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. As they raced towards their house, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She looked out the window and saw a funnel cloud in the distance. It was far away, but it was heading straight towards them. Her parents were panicking, trying to figure out the best course of action. Samantha could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the car skidded on the wet roads. They needed to find shelter, and fast. They pulled into their driveway and ran inside the house, grabbing whatever supplies they could find. Samantha's little brother was crying, and she could hear the sound of shattering glass as the tornado approached. They huddled in the basement as the storm raged on outside. The wall shook, and the sound was deafening. Samantha could barely hear her own thoughts over the roar of the wind. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. Samantha peeked through a crack in the door and saw that the tornado had passed. But what she saw outside made her blood run cold. The world outside was no longer the one she knew. The sky was a sickly shade of green, and the trees had been uprooted. Debris was scattered everywhere, and there was a strange, eerie silence that hung in the air. As they ventured outside, Samantha realized that they were not alone. There were other people out there, but they were different. Their eyes glowed with a strange, otherworldly light, and their skin was pale and translucent. Samantha and her family tried to run, but it was too late. The creatures descended upon them, their claws and teeth tearing into their flesh. Samantha screamed, but no one came to help. In the end, Samantha was the only survivor. She stumbled through the wreckage, her mind broken by what she had seen. But even as she tried to forget the horrors of that day, she could still hear the whispers in her ear, telling her that the storm was not just a natural disaster, but something much more sinister. Something that was coming for her, and for all of humanity. Story 3. It was just another ordinary day for John. He was a high school student who loved playing video games and hanging out with his friends. But all of that changed one day when he discovered that he could see in 4 dimensions. At first, John was excited about his newfound ability. He could see things that no one else could, like the movements of particles and the flow of energy. But soon he realized that there was a dark side to this power. He started to see things that terrified him, creatures that existed in another dimension, and they were watching him. They had always been there, but he was unable to perceive them until now. They were dark and twisted, with long, spindly fingers and razor-sharp teeth. They wanted to break through into his world, and John was the only thing standing in their way. John tried to ignore them and go about his daily life, but they wouldn't let him. They haunted his dreams and appeared to him when he was awake. They whispered to him, telling him to let them in, promising him power and control in exchange for his cooperation. At first, John resisted their temptations, but they were too strong. They started to take over his mind, and he could feel his willpower slipping away. The creatures were winning, and John knew that he had to do something before it was too late. He went to a psychic, hoping that they could help him get rid of these creatures. But the psychic was terrified of what she saw. She told John that the creatures were not just from another dimension, but from another universe entirely. They were ancient beings that had been banished from their world for their evil deeds, and they were now seeking a new home. John knew that he had to act fast. He spent countless hours researching these creatures, trying to find a way to stop them. He found a ritual that could banish them back to their own universe, but it required a sacrifice, a human sacrifice. John was horrified at the thought of sacrificing another human being, but he knew that it was the only way to save himself and the rest of the world. He searched for the perfect victim, someone who deserved to die, and found a murderer who was on death row. On the night of the full moon, John performed the ritual. He watched as the creatures were banished back to their universe, screaming in agony as they disappeared. But as he looked up at the moon, he realized that he was no longer alone. There were others like him, people who could see in 4 dimensions. They had been drawn to him by the power of the ritual, and they wanted to use his power for their own gain. John knew that he had made a terrible mistake, and that the nightmare was far from over. He could feel their eyes on him, watching his every move, and he knew that he would never be free from their grasp. As the days passed, John's mind became consumed by the creatures. He saw them everywhere he went, and he could feel them crawling under his skin. He tried to resist them, but they were too strong. They wanted to use him as a vessel to bring their entire universe into ours, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. In the end, John was consumed by the creatures. His body was no longer his own, and he became nothing more than a vessel for their evil intentions. The world was forever changed, as the creatures took over, and humanity was left to. But as I approached the entrance, something felt off. The air grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room was filled with strange objects, jars filled with mysterious liquids, old books with worn covers, and strange symbols etched into the walls. As I explored the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But every time I turned around, there was no one there. Then, Suddenly, the candles went out, and I was plunged into darkness. I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing through the room, and I knew I wasn't alone. Panic set in, and I started to run, blindly searching for the exit. But the darkness was disorienting, and I kept running in circles, unable to find my way out. Finally, I stumbled upon a door and burst through it, gasping for breath. I found myself outside, in the cold night air. I looked back at the old building, and saw a figure standing in the doorway, watching me. It was then that I realized the truth. The building wasn't abandoned at all, it was the home of a coven of witches, who had lured me inside to perform their dark rituals. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. But I knew that the witches would be watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. To this day, I still can't shake the feeling that they're out there, watching and waiting. And I know that if I ever stumble upon another abandoned building, I'll think twice before going inside. Story 4. I always knew there was something off about the basement in my new house. It was always freezing, no matter how high we turned up the heat, and there was a strange smell that lingered no matter how much we cleaned. But my husband insisted it was just an old house quirk and that I was being paranoid. One night, I couldn't sleep and decided to head down to the basement to grab a book to read. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, I heard something move in the darkness. I froze, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dim light, but it stayed pitch black. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, as if someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Shaken, I quickly grabbed a book and rushed back up the stairs, eager to get away from the creepy basement. But from that night on, I heard strange noises coming from the basement every night. Scratching, whispering, even laughter. My husband brushed it off as the house settling or animals in the walls, but I knew there was something else going on. One night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I slowly made my way down the stairs. The closer I got to the bottom, the louder the noises became. My heart racing, I pointed my flashlight towards the sound and gasped at what I saw. There, in the corner of the basement, was a small door I had never noticed before. It was covered in scratches and what looked like bloodstains. I tried to turn around and run back up the stairs, but my legs wouldn't move. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into a dark, musty room. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs towards me, but I couldn't see who or what was coming. A cold breath grazed the back of my neck and I felt something grab my arm. I screamed and bolted up the stairs, not looking back until I was safely locked in my bedroom. The next morning, I told my husband everything and he finally believed me. We called the police to investigate and they found evidence of someone living in the secret room beneath our house. But no one knows who or how long they had been there. From that day on, I never went back down to the basement. And even though the noises have stopped, I still can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from the shadows. Something is watching me from the shadows. Something is watching